Hey everyone, this is Louis7. Today we'll be taking a look at what makes the champion class so great in the Lord of the Rings Online, and why you might want to consider starting one. The champion is admittedly a class that has given me mixed feelings, where I often describe it as fun to play in short bursts but gets boring after a few hours. And that's because I always got bored of it, and because I got bored of it, I haven't played the champion much or talked about it in the most positive light, actually, even though, as I do say, other players love their champions. And because of this odd relationship, I decided the champion would be the perfect first class for me to cover in this new series, where I tell you what makes the class so great. Recently, I started leveling a champion in preparation for Angle of Mythaethel that came with Update 32 as a level 40 to 45 zone. Leveling this champion from about 20 to 37 starting in the North Downs, I was running missions, I was questing through Evendem, and I was even doing some group content with a duo lore master partner. This was honestly the most fun I ever had on the champion class, and this is in my 11 and a half years of playing LOTRO. So what made the champion so fun for me after a very long period of it being like a relatively boring class? Well, let's start with the basics. At its core, the champion is a hack and slash melee combatant that not only swings their weapons with like swiftness, but also with intense power. The champion name I think is very apt for the class, as you truly are a champion of melee combat. If you want to play the fantasy of a relentless warrior, such as what you might see in Gimli, the champion can quickly become a very appealing class. As a Master of Arms, champions can use a variety of two-handed weapons or dual-wield many types of one-handed weapons. While at endgame, usually a single style is going to be preferred, like as the meta, which does appear to lean towards two-handed weapon style right now, just as a heads up. This choice is given to players, and I think that's a flexibility that can make the class great. Beyond weapon choice, champions are built around consuming their fervor for massive attacks. Fervor is built rapidly in combat, allowing champions to frequently use their hardest hitting abilities with relatively little waiting around for cooldowns. I have found this to be a major appeal of the class, because instead of waiting for cooldowns to come up, there is actually a burden on player choice to use what they think is best at the right time. And this is important because it creates a combat loop that feels rewarding for using your best and strongest ability at the moment, while also planning out like what you want to do in your fight in the long term. And being defeated in combat, as unfortunate as that is, it does sometimes happen, but this offers the opportunity to learn how to use your different abilities and how that different use could lead to better outcomes. When you are victorious in combat, however, there is this feeling of accomplishment, especially in tougher fights, where the skill choice actually becomes more important, and you can feel that in the gameplay. Now, over the past few years, the champion class has had great improvements made to it, increasing the pace of play. One of the reasons I found the class boring to begin with was how effectively slow and clunky combat and skill execution felt on them. But all of that has been significantly improved in recent times, making the class much more fluid and fast-paced, where like gameplay lives up to the actual hack and slash type style. For some brief history on what these issues were, is it was not only the slow moving and long animations that made it feel slow, but there was also this infamous animation delay. This was a brief period after an ability finished its animation where you weren't able to use the next ability yet, and your character was just sitting there doing nothing. It kind of functioned like an extended global cooldown. But nowadays, this animation delay has been largely removed from the game, and animation speeds have also been significantly increased over the past few years. So yay, because these two major changes that have built up to made the class a lot more fun and appealing to me. And I think the class will be more appealing to anybody else who prefers the fast-paced and smooth gameplay that the champion nowadays offers. Now, what makes the champion great does not end at its basic gameplay loop here. Taking a deeper dive, the class offers two DPS specializations, the yellow line focusing on area of effect damage and the red line focusing on a single target. There is a third spec for tanking, but we'll save that for a moment later. Now, personally, I find the Redline Champion to be the most fun from a raw gameplay perspective, but I cannot deny the energy that the Yellow Line Champion exerts in combat. The Yellow Champion, or the Lawnmower spec as I like to call it, it mows down massive groups of enemies with very high damage. There is not much more satisfying in LOTRO than rounding up a bunch of orcs and then swinging your weapons around in wide arcs a couple times, and then suddenly you see all these bodies just dropping to the ground. Plus, the Yellow Line offers the hilariously unphysical Raging Blade ability, where you can hit enemies up to 26 feet away in a full circle around you. So that one's kind of fun. But if you are more into one-on-one combat, the Redline Champion can quickly deal with just about any foe with a flurry of quick attacks. A major reason I personally prefer the Redline is the short cooldowns and the fast-paced gameplay flow. I am never left with nothing to do, and my strongest attacks have short cooldowns so they can be used quite frequently. This makes longer duration combat feel smooth and consistent without major damage fluctuations. And I also find this really decreases the dependence on a single skill being like by far your main damage source, which some other classes do actually suffer from, such as the Fire Runekeeper, for example. Now, back to the champion. Building your champion can become really interesting at higher levels, where you have enough trait points to go fairly deep into another trait tree out of your spec. So as a DPS champion at this point, you can really strengthen your weakness by improving your AoE in the Yellow Line or single target in the Red Line. In my experience, this makes the champion feel like a lot more of a well-rounded type class than the low-level experience, and it makes fights geared towards like the opposite DPS spec feel less bad, because to be honest, at low levels, if you're like a Redline champion and go into a huge camp of 10 enemies, it kind of feels bad to not be in the Yellow Line because you just know how much better you could deal with them in the Yellow Line. And even the opposite, if you're fighting a single boss with a ton of health and you're in the Yellow Line and there's no AoE opportunity, feels kind of bad to only have AoE options. On top of that, with either DPS spec, you also have the option to get some blue line traits to bolster defenses, which can be a great boost to survivability. And speaking of the blue line, while I must admit it isn't the most viable of like tank specs, it is honestly quite fun, and I really do find it to be underrated. It has some decent mitigations, it has pretty good self-healing actually. You can go through quite a few different types of content without a healer with a champion tank, and it even has relatively high damage for a tank spec. And I think this really creates a great option that is sometimes overlooked for smaller group content or as an off tank. And then also one of my highlights with it is actually soloing difficult or even group content, because you can self-sustain throughout the fights with the way the champion tank works. And with the blue line, that actually has the last highlight for this section, Sweeping Riposte. I do have to focus on this ability because it's one of my favorite champion skills in the game. So it is a parry reaction. It won't really come into play if you are DPSing in group content where the tank has aggro and you don't have an opportunity to parry, but even as a DPS, I love this ability because of its decent damage and the fact that it's immediate, and that means it can be used to animation cancel. Now with animation canceling, while it is a bit sad at times to lose your animation, using Riposte as an animation cancel can really speed up the already fast gameplay, and it really just allows you to use more abilities in a shorter time frame, which ultimately to me is pretty fun. Plus, while you do cancel the animation, Riposte itself at least has a pretty neat animation to me. But I really do believe that this single trait is a big contributor to solo champion gameplay being great, especially at high level when you actually have enough trait points to comfortably get it. So if you are into being a relentless melee warrior who can just shred enemies apart with a flurry of blows, the champion may just be the class for you. From spinning your weapons in a dazzling fashion for the destruction of all enemies around you, to dealing massive blows for the annihilation of a foe mano a mano, the champion really does offer a lot of fun. Let me know what you think of the champion in the comments, and let me know what class you would like to see next. I hope you all enjoyed this video and learned what makes the champion so great in the Lord of the Rings Online. And if you did, please consider liking and subscribing for more, or becoming a channel member to support the content, and thanks for watching everyone.